There is a pretty clear and easy gearing path for Enhancement Shaman this season. The goal is essentially haste and mastery in every slot, and there is a lot of easy to obtain haste and mastery gear in the current raid and dungeons. So to start, we are going to set ourselves some goals for stats. We need haste as the number one priority. It is of utmost importance that we have at least 27% haste, and if we do not have this, we will have too much time in between tempests, and our lightning dogs will not overlap like they should, and additionally, you won't be able to use Primordial Wave on cooldown in AoE. So while we are still gearing, we are going to be fishing super hard for haste. I very much recommend using a haste flask, using haste food, and hunting for some haste rings and neck. Now, there is a point at 30% haste, or 19.8k haste, where we enter stat DR, and at this point we have too much haste, and we prefer to put any remaining stats into mastery. And for what our mastery is it is a percent increase to our damage that is more than our other stats. So for this reason, we ignore crit and verse and try to get our gear into haste and mastery as much as possible. And as a note, there is no need for the defensive benefit of verse in this current season. So for our consumables, we will use a haste flask, unless it is taking us far past the 19.8k haste DR, in which case we will swap to mastery flask or potentially alchemical chaos flask, which has the added benefit of making our tempered potion stronger at the caveat of increasing a random stat. For our food, I recommend secondary stat food Belladar's Bounty. It is really cheap, and if you level up your cooking to 75, you can turn 5 of them into a hearty food that persists through death. And in case you're used to other classes, Enhancement Shaman does not use mana oil. We use both Flame Tongue and Wind Fury on our weapons with no exception. Now to talk about the actual gear, I will start with the crafting. I recommend your first two crafts are a 636 weapon and then a 636 ring, because these two items are guaranteed value even in BIS, and they're your strongest current upgrades as well. Your other crafted item should be a 619 cape or wrist using the free 619 crest from the Webster questline. Eventually, you will upgrade this item to 636. And also, if you find yourself with nothing to upgrade and no Mythtrack gear in certain slots, you can craft a chest, belt, boots, or second weapon. When you go to craft your weapon and ring, there is a trick you can use to save crests on your other upgrade. First, you can craft the item, ideally with stats you don't want. Then, you go and recraft the item to your preferred stats. You will equip the item in both slots and then relog, and this will make it free to upgrade your other ring or weapon to 636 with no crest cost. Now to talk about embellishment. I believe your choice of embellishment is entirely inconsequential. Ascension does lose some value in M+, because it drops off, but Dawn Thread is so bad that it's simply just equal, even in M+. I recommend just using Ascension on your weapon and Writhing Armor Band on your wrist or cloak, because it is BIS in raid and equal in M+. Now for the actual gear we are looking for, we will start with tier. You are looking to use tier head, shoulders, gloves, and legs. If you get Mythtrack of any of these items, you are safe to catalyst them and upgrade them all the way to 639. We do not use the tier chest because its stats are crit and verse, which are not good. There are two replacement haste mastery chests in the game. One is from the Bloodbound Horror Boss, and the other is from Siege of Borealis. I recommend getting either of these chests. Now for boots, you want to be using the Catalyst boots because they are haste mastery. This means any Mythtrack boots you loot are BIS. Because boots drop from both Ulgrax and Roshanan, it is very easy to get Mythtrack boots if you are doing first 4 mythic bosses. Otherwise, I recommend farming Hero Track haste mastery boots from Arakara or Siege or Grimbatol, and waiting until you get Mythtrack boots in your vault to catalyze them. Now in the belt slot, our two BIS belts are identical stated belts from City of Threads and Stone Vault, which means we can farm them on Hero Track, but to get them on Myth Track, we need to get them in our vaults. While we are waiting to get them in our vault, we can use the Belt of Bloodbound Horror or also the BOE belt as Myth Track alternatives. Now the wrist slot is very simple. The only good wrist this season is off Sikran in Raid. If you do not have the Sikran wrist on Myth Track, simply use a crafted wrist. For our cloak, we have a few options. If you are lucky and get the Roshanan cloak on Mythic, I would use it. However, the proc is not overly relevant, so I would not stress too hard about getting it. A good alternative is the Ulgrax cloak on Mythtrack or the Stone Vault cloak from your vault. If you have none of these, I recommend crafting a cloak. Now to talk about our amulet, we really want the Sikran neck. It is very BIS, but unfortunately it can be quite difficult to get. If you don't have it, you are forced to use the Stone Vault neck. And eventually, if you had neither neck on Mythtrack, you would end up crafting a 636 neck. No other necks are viable. Rings are a bit easier. We've already crafted a ring, so we only need to get one extra ring and can freely upgrade any ring we get to 636. Both Bloodbound Horror and Brew Twister Overnax in Raid drop very well statted rings for us. If you can't get those, then the only good M+ ring is Circle of Bone from Grim Batol. I would recommend trying to avoid using rings that are not haste mastery. Now to talk about weapons, we already have a 636 weapon crafted. Our goal is to get a 639 myth track weapon in our main hand, because the main hand weapon has a really high DPS budget, and we can get one of these off of Ulgrax or Rashanan Mythic. If you can't get either of those and haven't got one from your vault, then you could craft a second 636 weapon. However, this is not ideal, and the offhand weapon slot is low budget, so it has low priority. Remember, always have the highest item level weapon in your main hand. And a note on the princess weapon, it is only good if you have it on mythic. The proc is extremely minor to the point where it does not matter. Now to talk about trinkets. We will be using one passive and one active trinket. It is not ideal to have two of either, we want one of each. In the passive trinket slot, we have 5 options. The first that I would recommend is Arakara Sackbrood. This is a nice passive main stat proc that gives you base haste, so it is nice for fixing your haste levels. Equal to Sackbrood is Empowering Crystal of Anubicaj, which is main stat with a secondary proc. If you get either of these 2 trinkets in your vault, I would recommend taking them on myth track. Another very good passive trinket option is Overnax Mercurial Egg, which does have higher damage potential than any other trinket. However, you need to play around it by min-maxing your movement to keep stacks between 10 and 20 of both stats, which could be a bit cumbersome. Now for 2 trinkets that you can't get on myth track, there is Shadow Binding Ritual Knife from Delves, which is actually extremely good for its item level. If you get lucky and get this trinket on hero track, it is better than any other 626 trinket. And the last trinket is Hand of Justice from Heroic BRD Time Walking. This is a very good trinket because its procs give you Maelstrom, and I think it only starts losing out on AoE versus 639 trinkets. So the idea with these trinkets is that if you have any on 639 myth track, you use them. Otherwise, you use whatever your preferred trinket on 626 is. They are all quite similar. And for your other trinket slot, this is hard locked to an on use. I definitely recommend Skarden's Grace from Grim Batol. If you get unlucky with farming it, you can use a transmitter from Nexus Princess if you have it. Now to talk about enchants, I recommend Radiant Power as the best M+ enchant for weapons, Radiant Haste or Mastery as the best enchant for rings. Make sure you have Crystal and Radiance on your chest, and Stormbound Armor Kit on your legs. For your gems, the Critiflect Blasphemite gem is very small, but I believe it is still worth to mix your gems to play around it. Additionally, Org Evokers and Healers typically play Binding of Binding, and in that case, you definitely need one of each gem. The rest of your gems should probably be in Heavy Haste and Mastery. Now, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Vault Logic. The items you are looking for are Mythic Skardens, Mythic Sikron Neck, Mythic Sackbrood or Empowering Crystal, and Mythic Haste Mastery Belt. These are the most important items because they can only come from Vault, except for the Sikron Neck, which is very, very strong, so you should take it anyways. If you don't get these in your Vault, you should just take other myth track items that are current upgrades. And to give a bit of a gearing path, I recommend focusing on Arakara, Stonevault, Siege of Borealis, and most importantly, Grim Batol, as these dungeons have all the important drops you need, and keep in mind you might be in Grim Batol for a long time farming your Skardens. And then after that, the best thing by far you can do for gearing is plugging the first 4 bosses of Mythic every week. You should try everything you can to get into an early Mythic pug. The bosses are all very easy and they all drop insane shaman loot. Almost every item is bis for enhance off of these bosses. I definitely recommend trying to get into one of these runs.